The van exploded at exactly 3:13 a.m. Not with fire, but with data, tens of thousands of intercepted phone calls, encrypted conversations, and surveillance feeds vanished in a single blink as the signal was cut. Somewhere in a federal control room, alarms wailed. Agents scrambled. A full-scale operation collapsed under the weight of one bizarre decision by a woman in a bathrobe, Crocs, and curlers. Her name? Karen. And while the rest of the country might picture her as just another neighborhood nuisance, that night, Karen didn't just cross a line. She ran it over, lit it on fire, and then tried to soothe the ashes. The part that stung the most? She thought she was doing her civic duty. In her words, "I'm just protecting the neighborhood from creeps in vans." In reality, she had unknowingly declared war on the FBI. 3 days earlier, I parked the van across from her house, in a legal curb space, beneath a tree that conveniently gave me a decent line of sight to the subject of interest, a low-level smuggler with ties to an interstate arms ring. I wasn't wearing a suit or a badge. Just jeans, a flannel shirt, and the kind of tired look you get from pretending to be someone else for too long. I had strict orders not to draw attention. Stay quiet. Blend in. Monitor. That was it. But I made one fatal error. I forgot that in this neighborhood, you're not allowed to blend in unless you're on the HOA registry or married to someone who is. Karen clocked me within 10 minutes of arrival. I saw her face pressed against her window, binoculars halfway up, mouth already forming a complaint. The curtain twitched like it was mad at me. 10 minutes after that, she was on the sidewalk, marching up to me like a middle manager who just found an unpaid parking ticket. "Excuse me," she barked, arms crossed so tightly I thought she might snap in half. "Are you with pest control? Because that van is not on the HOA-approved vehicle list, and it's throwing off the whole look of the street." I gave her my standard answer, the kind that reveals nothing but still sounds friendly. "Just a private contractor. I've got legal right to be here." "Doing what?" "Technical installation." She squinted at me, then at the van. "For who?" "Can't say." "Client privacy." Wrong answer. Her nostrils flared like a bull about to charge. "This is a safe community," she said. "We don't like strangers loitering in creepy vans." "I'm not loitering," I replied. "I'm working." She huffed. "We'll see about that." By nightfall, a printed notice was taped to my windshield with the HOA seal of passive aggression. "You are in violation of community vehicle codes. Immediate removal recommended." I peeled it off and slid it into my folder of weird neighborhood interactions. Karen wasn't even the assignment. She wasn't even on the radar. But that would soon change. What I didn't know was that Karen wasn't just a busybody. She fancied herself a law enforcer. Her garage was full of cones, outdated traffic signs, and laminated pamphlets titled things like, "How to Spot a Predator Van." She didn't call the police. No, that would have been too reasonable. Karen called someone else entirely. And that's when things got out of hand. The next morning, I came back from a quick trip to the corner cafe, no more than 15 minutes, to find 2 men standing beside my surveillance van. They wore mismatched uniforms with plastic-looking badges clipped to their belt. One of them had mirrored sunglasses that belonged in a 1980s action movie. The other kept chewing gum like it was his full-time job. "Problem?" I asked, sipping my coffee. "Yeah," said Sunglasses. "This vehicle's being impounded. It's in violation of local ordinances." "Which ordinances?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Didn't you get the notice?" Gum Chewer chimed in. "We're working with the HOA." Karen stood proudly across the street, phone out, filming like she was directing a reality show. "That's the guy. That's the van," she called out, grinning ear to ear. I didn't argue. I didn't flash a badge or drop any names. Instead, I took out my phone, took a single photo of the fake cops and the van, and walked away. It wasn't just a van. Inside was $500,000 of surveillance gear. Satellite relays, audio interceptors, coded networks, All of it now in the hands of two morons who thought they were doing a parking enforcement gig for a woman who paid them in Starbucks gift cards and a hot tip about a creepy guy with weird antennas. Back at the field office, the room fell silent when I showed the photo. My handler stared at it for a long second before muttering, "Tell me this is Photoshop." "It's not," I said. "Where's the van now?" "Impounded," I replied. "Illegally." "How?" "I think Karen hired fake cops to tow it." There was a long pause. Then the room erupted. Phones rang. Chairs scraped. A legal team launched into overdrive. It wasn't just about the van. It was the fact that someone had interfered with a federal investigation, impersonated law enforcement, and potentially leaked classified surveillance materials to some fly-by-night towing crew. The entire operation, weeks in the making, was compromised. We didn't even know how much damage was done yet. And all of it started with Karen, the woman with the HLA badge, a megaphone in her living room, and an inflated sense of purpose had just made the single worst decision of her life. The FBI was now involved, and they were furious. But me? I wasn't furious. I was patient, calm, because I knew exactly how this would end. And Karen had no idea just how big of a mistake she had made. The drive to the impound lot felt like a funeral procession for federal secrecy. No sirens, no lights, just quiet fury and the low hum of impending consequences. I sat in the back seat of an unmarked government SUV, flanked by two agents who looked like they hadn't blinked since the Cold War. Neither of them spoke. I didn't blame them. This wasn't just an inconvenience. Karen had just disrupted a surveillance op tied to a gun trafficking ring that spanned 3 states. The van she had towed, proudly, no less, was wired with more technology than a small satellite. That tech was now in the hands of two people who looked like they couldn't pass a background check at Chuck E. Cheese. When we arrived at the impound, we didn't need to knock. The place was surrounded by chain-link fencing topped with barbed wire, but the front gate was open, like someone had forgotten they were supposed to look intimidating. A huge vinyl banner reading, "Trooper Tony's Towing, We Serve Justice," flapped in the wind, complete with an American flag and a poorly photoshopped eagle. A chihuahua barked from a crate near the entrance, its tiny paws tapping on the metal as if it were also part of the security team. Trooper Tony emerged from a side shed in a uniform that looked like it had been ordered from a Halloween catalog. His badge was crooked, his belt didn't match his pants, and his duty holster appeared to contain a bottle of hand sanitizer. He squinted at us, unbothered. "Y'all here for the van?" My handler stepped forward, expression flat. "We're with the federal government. Step aside." Tony hesitated for a beat too long. "You got a warrant?" "Do you want us to get one?" she asked. That was enough. Tony nodded, gestured broadly to the yard, and muttered something about just helping the community. We walked past piles of scrap metal and broken taillights until we saw it, the van. Or at least what was left of it. The side panel was dented, one of the rear doors had been forced open, and someone had duct-taped a sign to the windshield that read, "Pervo van do not release." The other fake officer, Sergeant Sherry, arrived shortly after with a pink smoothie in one hand and a walkie-talkie in the other. She wore mirrored aviators and chewing gum like she'd just walked out of a high school drama production about cop. "Hey! You can't just walk in here. This is private property." My handler turned to her slowly. "You impersonated a law enforcement officer, seized a federal surveillance vehicle, and uploaded footage of yourself bragging about it to TikTok. This is no longer private property. This is now a federal crime scene." Sherry's face turned 3 shades of pale. The smoothie drooped in her hand like it had suddenly gained weight. While the techs began retrieving what was salvageable from the van, I walked the perimeter, keeping an eye out for anything else we might have missed. That's when I noticed the security camera near the shed, old but functional. I pointed it out, and one of our analysts pulled the footage. What we saw nearly made me choke on my own laugh. Karen had been there. Not just once, 3 times. She had come by the yard to check in on the tow job, brought muffins for the crew, and posed next to the van like it was a trophy. In one clip, she dramatically pointed to the van and shouted, "I saved the neighborhood," as Sergeant Sherry gave her a thumbs up. In another, she banged on the rear doors, yelling, "I know you're in there, you sicko!" like she thought a criminal was hiding inside. She even tried to open the door with a key she had borrowed from her son's toolbox. She yanked at wires and screamed when something sparked. By the time we got back to headquarters, the mood had shifted from outrage to disbelief. Karen hadn't just interfered. She had inserted herself into a classified op with the confidence of a community theater actress auditioning for CSI. It was like watching a sitcom spiral into a legal thriller. Our cyber team began digging through her digital history. It didn't take long to find a trail of breadcrumbs soaked in delusion. Karen had spent the last 6 months running a Facebook group called Neighborhood Eyes, where she regularly posted grainy images of delivery trucks, landscapers, and teenagers with skateboards. She once wrote a 900-word post about a guy walking his dog suspiciously slow. Her pinned post? A manifesto titled, "How to Spot a Creep: Vans, Beards, and Binoculars." Beneath the paranoia was something more dangerous. She believed she was above the law. She had created her own emergency protocols for the neighborhood, including a list of trusted enforcers, which included herself, a former mall security guard, and someone she met at a Costco wine tasting. There were even emails. She'd contacted multiple freelance security professionals offering community defense contracts. The two she ultimately hired, Tony and Sherry, were rejects from a security licensing course and had failed background checks for airport parking. We gathered everything: the footage, the posts, the evidence from the impound, the tampering, the impersonation, the unauthorized tow. It was a solid case, and it was going straight to the federal prosecutor's office. But before that, we had one more move to make. I was sent back to the neighborhood. It wasn't an arrest. Not yet. We needed to make it clear that this wasn't just some HOA dispute. Karen needed to see what it felt like to be the one under scrutiny. As I pulled up to the curb again, in a different vehicle this time, she came out onto her lawn like she was expecting an award ceremony. Her posture screamed victory. "Well," she said smugly, "glad to see you found a more appropriate car." I stepped out, calm. "Hey Karen. Just wanted to let you know, you'll be getting visitors soon." She tilted her head, confused but still smiling. "What kind of visitors?" "Federal ones." Her smile faltered just for a second. "Is this about the van?" I told the HOA I was well within my rights. That thing was creepy. I did what needed to be done. I nodded. "We'll be sure to mention that in the report." Then I walked away, leaving her on the sidewalk, gripping her phone tightly like it was a shield. She didn't know what was coming next. The black SUVs, the federal subpoenas, the courtroom footage, the sudden, sharp realization that she wasn't the sheriff of this cul-de-sac anymore. Karen had poked a sleeping bear. And now the bear had her scent. The neighborhood was still when the first black SUV rolled in. It didn't blare sirens or flashlights, but somehow its silence was louder than any alarm. Karen was out front watering her plastic plants with a smug little sway in her step, blissfully unaware that her entire life was about to be unwrapped like a particularly chaotic birthday present. She paused when the second vehicle arrived, then the third, and by the time the agents stepped out in suits with badges glinting under the morning sun, the hose in her hand went limp and water began soaking her Crocs. She blinked once, twice, like her brain needed a reboot. Then, in classic Karen fashion, she snapped into a defensive stance. "Excuse me, is there a reason the FBI is trespassing on my property?" The lead agent didn't flinch. "Ma'am, we're here in relation to your involvement with the unauthorized seizure of a federal surveillance vehicle." Karen laughed. It wasn't the joyful kind. It was the shrill cackle of someone who'd watched too many courtroom dramas and thought she could improvise her way out of a felony. "Oh, that? I was protecting the neighborhood. That van had been sitting there for days. There were antennas, tinted windows, probably someone trafficking pets or something. We have footage of you hiring 2 unlicensed individuals, directing them to impersonate officers, and personally tampering with the equipment inside the van. Karen's mouth opened like she had something prepared. A defense. A speech maybe. But nothing came out. Her eyes darted to the neighbors, who were already peeking through blinds and from porches. One even brought out popcorn. The suburban grapevine was buzzing. Karen, queen of HOA micromanagement, was being called out by the actual government. Not even she had a policy for this. She shifted gears. Look, I didn't know it was FBI. If someone had just told me. We don't advertise our operations, ma'am. And you were explicitly told by the vehicle's occupant that it was legally parked and being used for professional reasons. I thought he was lying. That's not a legal defense. Karen's voice dropped an octave. Okay, fine. But you can't arrest me for calling a tow. That's not illegal. You're not being charged for calling a tow. You're being investigated for obstruction of justice, impersonation of law enforcement, and tampering with federal property. You also posted multiple photos and conspiracy theories about an ongoing federal operation online. She froze. Wait, you mean the Facebook posts? Yes, ma'am. All of them. Her voice cracked. But that group was private. The agent didn't even blink. So is national security. They handed her an official notice and left her standing on the lawn, drenched in water and indignation, while the rest of the neighborhood buzzed like someone had kicked a hive. Nobody came to her defense. Not one soul. Even her closest HOA loyalists conveniently forgot their prior alignment, suddenly fascinated by their garden gnomes or their mailbox maintenance. Later that afternoon, Karen did what any unqualified, overconfident person with a complete lack of self-awareness would do. She filed a lawsuit. Not against me. Not even against the agent. She sued the FBI. In small claims court. For harassment. The clerk who received the paperwork reportedly laughed so hard she had to take an early lunch. Karen strutted out of that office with the misplaced confidence of someone who thought the Constitution had her name scribbled in the margins. She even did a victory post in her group, writing, "Never back down." They messed with the wrong patriot. Meanwhile, the FBI wasn't just building a case. They were preparing to make an example. They began issuing subpoenas. Trooper Tony and Sergeant Sherry were already in custody, and both were eager to talk. Turns out, not only did they know they weren't real cops, but they also had a side hustle filming, tactical training, videos on YouTube where they used Nerf guns and yelled things like "breach, breach, breach" before diving into inflatable pools. Tony confessed that Karen had paid them $300 each, plus a $50 Panera Bread gift card, to tow the van quietly. Sherry had screenshots of Karen instructing them to ignore any federal logos and pretend it's a stolen Comcast van. They both claimed they thought this was some neighborhood prank until they saw the inside of the vehicle and realized there were actual government-grade devices in there. But instead of stopping, they doubled down and decided to sell a few photos online. One even ended up in a conspiracy subreddit titled, "Is this the mind control van?" Karen's digital footprint didn't help her case. In addition to her conspiracy blog posts and delusional rant videos, she had written a manifesto accusing the water company of using fluoride to track mood. There was a list she made titled, "Suspicious Persons I've Seen This Week," which included a kid selling Girl Scout cookies and an Amazon driver who looked too happy. I watched it all unfold with a quiet satisfaction. Not because I wanted revenge, but because this woman, with no training, no badge, and no jurisdiction, had taken it upon herself to destroy something she didn't understand. And now, she was facing consequences she couldn't comprehend. When the official charges were filed, Karen's reaction was a masterclass in entitlement. She showed up to the arraignment wearing a blazer that still had a department store tag hanging from the armpit, clutching a binder labeled Karen's defense plan. Her lawyer was her cousin Jeff, who once ran for local treasurer and lost by a record margin. His opening statement included the phrase, "Ladies and gentlemen of the court, my client is not guilty of caring too much." It didn't go well. The prosecutor introduced the tampering video. The court watched in stunned silence as Karen appeared on screen, yanking at cables, banging on the van's interior walls and yelling, "I know your tricks, deep state." At one point, she tried to pry open a metal panel using what looked like a salad fork. When asked why she did any of this, she simply said, "Because I have intuition." And rights. The judge rubbed his temples for nearly a full minute before saying, "This is not a sitcom, ma'am. This is a federal court." Even so, Karen never admitted fault. She stood firm in her belief that she was in the right, that the government was out to get her, and that HOA members had the divine right to tow anything suspicious. But the tide had turned. Her supporters evaporated. Her neighborhood board quietly voted to remove her from all positions. Even her best friend Marlene, who once petitioned to ban wind chimes, stopped answering her text. Karen, once the unchallenged ruler of lawn color regulations and mailbox heights, was now a punchline. A cautionary tale. A woman who hired fake cops to tow an FBI surveillance van and thought she'd get away with it. As the court adjourned and people filed out, someone in the back row muttered, "What's she gonna do next? Sue NASA for putting satellites over her house." And honestly, with Karen, that didn't seem out of the question. The courtroom buzzed with a mix of disbelief and amusement as Karen marched in on the first day of her trial, dressed in a pantsuit that screamed power but paired with sunglasses indoors that whispered denial. Her cousin Jeff, acting as her lawyer, trailed behind carrying a cardboard box labeled evidence, which appeared to contain a binder, a stress ball, and what looked suspiciously like a rotisserie chicken. Karen scanned the room like a reality show contestant entering tribal council, as if she expected applause or a surprise twist in her favor. Instead, she got silence and a judge who looked like he had already seen too much of humanity for one lifetime. The prosecutor wasted no time. They laid out the charges: obstruction of justice, impersonation of law enforcement by proxy, tampering with federal property, dissemination of classified materials, and accessory to wiretap interference. Every word landed like a weight, but Karen just smiled like she thought this was a bad dinner party and the awkwardness would pass if she stayed chipper enough. She leaned over to Jeff and whispered something. He nodded with enthusiasm, then stood up for his opening statement. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Jeff began, pausing for dramatic effect, "my client stands accused of caring too much, of doing what any rational, concerned citizen would do in the face of potential danger. She saw something suspicious. She acted. And now she's being villainized by the very people who were supposed to protect her." The jury blinked in unison. The judge blinked slower. The prosecutor slowly turned a page in their file, unimpressed. Karen beamed like she thought they were all about to burst into applause. Then came the evidence. First up was the security footage from the impound lot. The video showed Karen gleefully directing Tony and Sherry like she was casting a local theater production titled Tactical Extraction. She pointed, she posed, she even high-fived Sherry after the van was successfully hitched. In one moment she dramatically yelled, "This is what justice looks like," while standing with one foot on a curb like she was reenacting the raising of a flag. Karen's defense team didn't object. Jeff just scribbled something onto a sticky note and then dropped his pen. Then came the internal footage from inside the van. The silence in the courtroom turned into a vacuum as the grainy black and white video began to play. Karen could be seen banging on the interior door with a garden tool, her mouth moving furiously. A subtitle was added for clarity. "I know your tech secrets, you deep state bastards." At one point, she tried to pry open a sealed panel with a hairbrush and was shocked by a spark that sent her stumbling back. The prosecution paused the video. For the record, that spark was caused by direct tampering with an encrypted federal power relay. This action temporarily disrupted an open investigation involving interstate arms trafficking. Karen's mouth was tight. Jeff leaned over and whispered again, this time looking less confident. Karen shook her head defiantly and stood. I'd like to say something. The judge sighed. Ms. Harper, your attorney should speak for you. Karen raised her voice. No, this is my neighborhood. My life. I have a right to explain. The judge waved a hand. Fine. Proceed. Karen took a dramatic step forward. All I did was defend my street. That van was suspicious. That man gave me attitude. I have instincts. I saw something and I said something, just like the posters say. Maybe the FBI should thank me for noticing something they obviously didn't. The courtroom was silent again, but this time it wasn't stunned. It was awkward. Deeply awkward. The kind of silence that settles in when someone tells a joke at a funeral. Even the bailiff looked away. Jeff slowly lowered his head onto the desk. The prosecutor rose. Your Honor, we'd like to call our next witness, Special Agent Wallace. That was me. I stepped up to the stand and gave my credentials. I kept my tone neutral, clear, professional. I explained the nature of the surveillance operation, the importance of discretion, the fact that the van was operating under full legal authority, and that I had personally warned Ms. Harper not to interfere. I described her behavior, her online activity, the messages she sent to the fake cops, and the consequences of the compromised equipment. The prosecutor nodded. Can you summarize the impact of Ms. Harper's actions on your investigation? We lost weeks of work. Sensitive data was compromised. Multiple suspects vanished. Equipment was damaged. And our team was exposed to public scrutiny in the middle of an active op. Karen muttered something under her breath. I caught the word liar. I ignored it. The jury took note. One woman kept shaking her head. Another man simply mouthed, wow, as I described the cost of replacing the encrypted hardware. Nearly $475,000, not including man-hours or relocation expenses for agents. Then came the final piece of the puzzle. The prosecution pulled up screenshots of Karen's Facebook posts. One in particular stood out. A selfie of Karen standing in front of the van, captioned, I took down a perv van today. You're welcome, America. Another post read, this is what happens when the government gets lazy. Thank God we still have HOA warriors like me. There was a beat of silence before the prosecutor said, nothing further. Jeff rose, adjusting his collar like it had just tried to strangle him. No questions. Karen looked stunned. Wait. You're not going to. He sat down. When it came time for the verdict, there wasn't much suspense. The jury deliberated for just over an hour. Karen was found guilty on 3 counts: interfering with a federal investigation, destruction of government property, and accessory to law enforcement impersonation. The other charges, surprisingly, were dropped, likely in exchange for her agreement to never go near federal agents or operations again. The judge issued a sentence that felt both reasonable and poetic. Karen would serve 2 years of probation, pay $78,000 in damages, and complete 200 hours of community service, none of which could involve any HOA activity, neighborhood watch groups, or contact with anything resembling a badge. Her face drained of color as the judge added, and you are officially banned from holding any leadership position in your neighborhood's HOA for a minimum of 5 years. Someone in the back of the courtroom audibly said, thank God. Karen looked like she'd been physically slapped. As she was led out, she turned back toward the gallery. You people are ungrateful. I saved you. I kept this place safe. No one responded. Not even Jeff. And just like that, the reign of Karen came to an unceremonious end, not with sirens, but with silence. The first HOA meeting after Karen's trial was the kind of event people showed up for just to witness the aftermath. Folding chairs lined the community clubhouse, cheap cookies sat untouched on a plastic table, and there was a palpable buzz in the air, equal parts curiosity and pure, unfiltered relief. 4 years, Karen had ruled these meetings with the subtlety of a wrecking ball. She once made a grown man cry over the color of his garden gnome. But tonight, her chair was empty. Her name had been removed from the HOA sign-in sheet. Someone even brought a happy retirement balloon, which had been altered with permanent marker to say happy removal. No one admitted to it, but everyone secretly wished they had thought of it first. I didn't usually attend these meetings. I had always kept a low profile, even before the van incident. But tonight, the neighborhood wanted answers. They had questions, not just about Karen's fate, but about me. About the van. About whether they had been living next to a federal sting operation while casually arguing over whose trash bins were too far from the curb. I arrived quietly and took a seat in the back. People turned to look. Some nodded. One elderly woman whispered, "That's the guy with the van," as if I were some kind of suburban legend. The newly elected HOA president, a young woman named Trina who once received a written warning from Karen for using festive mailbox decorations, called the meeting to order. "Before we get into agenda items," she said, "I think it's fair to acknowledge the unusual circumstances we've all been part of lately." That got a laugh. And since I know many of you have questions, we invited Mr. Wallace to say a few words, if he's willing. All eyes turned to me. I stood, cleared my throat, and kept it simple. "I'm with a federal agency. The van was part of a classified investigation. What happened wasn't supposed to happen. But thanks to Karen, it did. And while I can't discuss many details, I want you all to know, no one in this neighborhood was ever in danger. The only thing at risk was a very expensive operation that got derailed because someone decided they were above the law." There was a pause, then someone clapped. A few others followed. Soon, it turned into a wave of applause that made me sit down with a faint smile. This wasn't a neighborhood plagued by crime or chaos. It was just a community that, like so many others, had been hijacked by one person's ego and paranoia. And now it was free. After the meeting, a few people came up to thank me. One guy, Alan, shook my hand and said, "You have no idea how long we've wanted her gone." I painted my garage door beige instead of bone. She took pictures. Sent them to the city. Another woman leaned in conspiratorially and whispered, "I replaced my porch light bulb with one of those warm yellow ones." She said it made the street feel unsafe and wrote me a citation. A citation. For light temperature. Stories like that poured in, and with every one, I understood just how far Karen's grip had reached. Her obsession with order wasn't about safety or standards. It was about control. And once she lost it, she spiraled straight into a federal case. A few days later, the FBI gave me a commendation. It wasn't a big ceremony. Just a quiet handshake, a letter for my file, and an offer to lead my own field team in a new city. I accepted. It was time to move on. The van had been decommissioned, the operation rebuilt elsewhere, and my time in this quiet little suburb was officially over. But before I left, I hosted a barbecue. Nothing fancy, just burgers, chips, and cold drink. I invited the whole block. People showed up with lawn chairs, homemade desserts, and wide smiles. The mood was light, almost celebratory. Kids played in the sprinklers. A retired couple brought wine. One guy set up a speaker and played a playlist called Karen Free Classics. As I flipped burgers, someone asked, "So what exactly was going on in that van?" I just smiled and said, "If I told you, I'd have to make you do 200 hours of community service." They laughed, but the point stuck. It wasn't about the tech. It was about trust, and how quickly one person's delusion could unravel something carefully built. By sunset, the backyard was filled with laughter and smoke from the grill. I stood near the fence, looking out over a neighborhood that had gone from chaos back to calm. People finally had breathing room. There were no more surprise citations. No clipboard patrols. Just neighbors, finally acting like neighbors. And then, as if summoned by irony itself, someone asked, "Hey, whatever happened to Karen?" I didn't answer right away. Part of me wondered the same thing. The answer came a week later, in the most unexpected way. I was in line at a big-box hardware store, picking up some final moving supplies, when I heard a familiar voice arguing near the customer service desk. I peeked over and saw her, Karen. No sunglasses this time. No Crocs. No clipboard. Just a red vest with a name tag and a 1,000-yard stare as a customer berated her about a defective hose attachment. She spotted me. Our eyes met. There was no explosion. No shouting. Just a long, awkward pause. I gave her a polite nod and turned back to the checkout. Behind me, I heard her sigh. Not the angry kind. The defeated kind. The kind that comes after a storm has finally passed and you realize the debris isn't just outside, it's inside too. Karen wasn't dangerous anymore. She wasn't powerful. She was just another face behind a counter, folding returns and regretting choices. Her reign was over, and in its place stood a community that had learned something valuable. Vigilance matters, but so does humility. And power, real power, doesn't come from barking orders or writing citations. It comes from knowing when to step back, when to listen, and when to let go. As I loaded the last of my boxes into the SUV and looked at the neighborhood one final time, I knew I'd remember this place. Not because of the operation. Not even because of Karen. But because it reminded me how thin the line is between control and chaos, and how even the smallest spark, like one woman's obsession with a van, can light up the whole block. But this time, thankfully, it had also burned itself out.